Hello, everyone. This is Chris Cattrall from Capacity. You're listening to Fundamentally Different Podcast. On today's show, we're talking all things partnerships, culture and collaboration in public services. I'm delighted that we've got two guests with real experience and insight with public services in Liverpool City region. Tom Harrison is Chief Executive at Local Solutions, a charity based in Liverpool supporting people experiencing disadvantage, exclusion and vulnerability. He's a dad. He supports Liverpool and his music genre is?
Probably too young for his age.
Okay.
All things electronic, maybe a bit of hip-hop, maybe stuff that I'm far too old and tired for, but I still listen to anyway.
Excellent. And our second guest is Paul Boyce, who's the former Director of Children's Services at leading Northwest Local Authorities. Paul made the move from local government to consultant in 2021. He's now a partner at Coral Reef, a consultancy specialising in changing organisations for the better. Paul was awarded an OBE in 2021 in the New Year's Honours for his services to supporting young people and children in Merseyside. Paul is also a Red. He's also a dad, and his musical genre is...
Without a shadow of a doubt, my favourite band of all time with the Revolutionary Arm with the Infant Jesus.
Brilliant.
Do you want to know more about them?
Maybe for a separate podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe for a separate podcast. I wanted to kick off, if it's all right, thinking about partnerships. You two, I've been involved in a lot of partnerships. They're very easy to say. They're very easy to write about, but they're very, very difficult to do. I guess I'm keen to chat about what really makes them work, what gets them unstuck, and keen if we've got examples. So, Paul, when thinking about what makes them work.
Well, my confession on this is that I spent far too long in my life in partnerships. And when you ask me the question, what makes them work, I have to think hard about ones that actually did work, really.
Okay.
And I've got some examples of where
Brilliant.
Partnerships did work, so I can come back to that. But I do think we use that word partnership very loosely.
Okay.
Oftentimes we use that word as a cover story for pretending that we're trying to do something, when actually what we're trying to do is the same as we've already done before. So
Okay.
there's a kind of a thing for me about beware of partnerships that have got the same people in them, saying the same things and doing the same things. And actually also beware of partnerships that are intent on managing the here and now. And by doing so, potentially stifle innovation and thinking. So,
Okay.
as I say, most of my experience have been in rooms like that. Where I've experienced better partnerships, it's where the people who are in the room want to be there for reasons that aren't necessarily to do with who they work for or what they do in their day jobs. Mm-hmm. So recognition that if we are going to do something better, then we can only do it together. Mm-hmm. And so that starts off with, for me, about having some kind of common mission, some particular set of issues that need to be addressed, where there is an acceptance of difference, where there's trust, where there's lots of challenge, and where there's a direct connection between the business of that group, that partnership, and the people who you are there to serve. So I've had experience of things
Great.
like that. They tend to be subversive and not
What do you mean by
necessarily
that?
set up without telling people that you're doing it, or sitting outside of because I think a lot of people talk about partnerships being part of governance arrangements. In my world, I'm sure your world, Tom, as well, you're used to things like health and wellbeing boards or children and young people partnerships or safeguarding partnerships, where nothing happens really, or not enough happens.
Paul, paused. Why do we keep doing it?
I think it's because we believe that we have to do it.
Okay.
And to be fair to people, some of these partnerships are required. They're not things that you can opt out of. And therefore they give you a kind of a comfort, don't they, that you've achieved something because you've been in a partnership meeting or you've been in a partnership for several years or whatever. My classic example of this was I won't tell you where it was, but it was a health and wellbeing board. And they were having a development session. And it was being facilitated by people who know how to facilitate these things. And it was all kind of glorification of the great achievements that we've made over the last 10 years. And because it's the kind of person I am, I just asked a question. I said, what were the health inequalities 10 years ago? And what are they now?
Yeah.
Because the primary purpose of a health and wellbeing board, or one of the purposes of a health and wellbeing board, is to reduce health inequalities. What have we achieved over the last 10 years? And the person who knew the answer to that question said, actually, health inequalities have worsened over the last 10 years. Yeah. Therefore, my statement about beware of partnerships that actually believe that they are doing something when they can't prove that they are.
Okay.
So I think they can become institutionalized, they can become stifling, they become bureaucratic, they can become places where accountability sits, but the accountability is based on maintenance rather than change.
Okay. And Tom, so in difference to Paul, you sat at the provider side of this.
Yep.
Agree or disagree with?
I would like to disagree because I like the sense of balance, but a lot of what Paul says is true.
Yeah.
There's a sense that partnerships are set up to dilute risk, to provide a rump of providers that can steer resources towards themselves due to their size. So it is absolutely true. But the less formal partnerships, or the ones that grow more organically, have been super effective at generating ideas and turning those into small bits of action that they can then grow. And to go back to the start of your question, what makes them work? Hey, cheeky link back. I was thinking about this over the week. This is rubbish, isn't it? I had a week's leave and I'm thinking about your podcast question. I think the key is vulnerability. I think it's the willingness to be vulnerable, whether that's in reputation, resources, risk. And I think when you find another organization or another thinker or another group of people that you're willing to be vulnerable with because they'll reciprocate that, you can get to that exchange of ideas and make a difference. And I think that's probably the key. A lot of people go into things quite guarded, hoping for resources, hoping for influence, hoping to spread risk. But the best ones are where you go in saying, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable and I'm going to share that with whoever we're partnering with.
I absolutely agree with that.
And do you think that comes more natural to the voluntary sector in comparison to the public sector?
No, I think we like to say it does. We like to say we're really good at playing together, but we're not really, because actually we've been marketized for a long time. So we've been told to compete. And so being told to compete makes it more difficult to be truly open and exchanging. And I think there's phenomenal people in local authorities that would love to do more open, more vulnerable partnership work, but they're bound by other sets of constraints, which makes that difficult as well. So I don't think the third sector is any better at it. I just think we've got slightly different conditions.
Okay. Paul, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with what Tom's saying. I don't think it's about organisations. I think it's about people.
Yeah.
And if you get people who connect, believe in the same thing, want to achieve the same thing, leave their egos outside the room, divest themselves of their organisational responsibilities and cut to the chase and support each other when doing that and challenge each other as well, then you're far more likely to get to a place which would be better off, or make a better place for the people that you're supposed to be working for, which isn't your organisation at the end of the day. And I remember a long, long time ago having a conversation with somebody about the difference between public sector and third sector, and the third sector is innovative and all the rest of it. And I think it can be, but it doesn't. It's not by definition. I think it is very much about who's leading those organisations and what culture you set as to whether or not you achieve great things. I think we've institutionalised a lot of our imagination, and to stop people from doing stuff really, because it's risk, isn't it, all the time? I've used the health and wellbeing, but I'm not picking on that particularly. But there's assurance all the time, and what I would call the policing role of governance to make sure everyone's doing the jobs properly. Well, actually, what's that got to do with partnership working really? What we should be doing is to say, if we carry on doing what we're doing, we're not going to achieve the things that need to be achieved. Therefore, we need a partnership that looks at what are the options that we've got rather than maintaining the here and now.
Okay.
So,
and look, you've both done brilliant things. Like what brings a smile to your face when you think about partnerships, like in terms of a real example?
That's a good question. What brings a smile to my face? I really like it when the mechanisms, the apparatus of institutions gets out of the way. I really, really love it when actually we think we know what we're doing, but we're not sure. So we really want to push the resources all the way down to communities and people and let them work it out and not judge them and not say, oh, hang on, that's outside the specification, or that door's closed. We're not there to fund that. I love it when we get out the way.
Okay.
So a more empowering, facilitating role and lesser, risk management sort of process-driven thing, which is difficult to do, particularly when you're trying to deliver things that have a degree of vulnerability or have a statutory element. Yeah. But those things are the most phenomenal stuff. Just put the money and the ideas in the hands of people delivering and communities that are participating and see what happens.
Yeah. And if I pushed you, Tom, for an example?
Favourite thing in the last year is community social care pilot.
Okay.
Because I thought, hey, here's a great idea. I have no idea quite where it's going, but I think it should be this. By the time we'd finished it 12 months later on and it grew legs, it looked entirely different. It was nothing to do with what I thought was needed, and I thought that was phenomenal.
Great. Paul, what brings a smile to your face?
I think you and I must be the brothers to another mother, or the same mother. But I think it's very much what Tom's saying, really, about what brings a smile to my face is when you watch other people being successful because you've created that opportunity rather than managed it for them.
Okay.
And I'll make reference then into the stuff that's been done in the Wirral, with which I know Capacity were fundamentally involved with, about creating capacity in order to do things that needed to be done through the people of that community, really. And I think that empowerment model, the only role that the local authority played in that was encouraging that to happen and putting some resource on it. So at the end of the day, we didn't sit in rooms trying to design out or design in innovation or solve problems that we've never been able to solve by doing the things that we've been doing. In fact, partly recognising that we were part of the problem and allowing people the space to innovate, do some evaluation. Some things didn't work. I actually quite like it when things don't work as well, because I don't think we often admit that. I think we pretend everything works, and if it doesn't work well, we seek to blame the people who are using the services for not using them properly. So I think that kind of culture of allowing people to try things out that clearly don't work as well as we would like them to, and then stop doing it is a really good thing. And then there's things like cradle to career stuff, which has taken off now across city region, isn't it? Which is a real starts off with a engagement with communities to understand what the barriers have been for them, rather than assuming that and prescribe the solution to them and stick with it for a generation. And we don't know what the outcomes are going to be yet, but that's brave. And that's partnership work in real life for me. And you would never have achieved that sitting in a room with the same people, saying the same things and doing the same things. And all of that came about because there was we maybe come to this later on about they just happened to be in the orbit the right people. And once you see that, you say, right, let's just do it then. Yeah.
Do we need to talk about failure more? Do we need to?
I think failure is so important. One of the things that I've done in the past is to encourage people to believe that nothing's impossible. Because one of the things that you'll always get told by people is we can't do that because, and often it's because we don't want to do it, or we don't know how to do it, or if we do it and it doesn't work, we're going to get told off. So actually, I think failure is far more important than success.
Okay,
how are you going to learn if you don't get it wrong? It's about how you respond. It's basically defined by failure, isn't it? As well, I'm not talking about things that make people's lives worse. I'm talking about a failure that didn't make it better. And instead of pretending that it did or wanting it to work or trying again, just stop it and then let's do something else instead. So I think you just learn so much more from from that kind of failure than you will do sometimes from success.
Yeah. Okay. Thinking about teams, like it's pretty evident that, you both like being in sort of creative, confident teams. Tom, you've obviously you've been a manager at Local Solutions. You've stepped up to a director. You've now, become chief executive. What that transition from director to chief exec, what did you do in that sort of transition? Like, what did you change your approach from when you were a director to a chief exec? Was it exactly the same?
I was quite lucky when I was the director because the chief exec had at the time, thanks Steve.
Thanks Steve.
Just recognised that I was quite good being left to get on with stuff. So actually this idea of building teams, giving them autonomy, saying be creative, if you cock it up, I'll take responsibility, give it a go, work out who you need to put in the driving seat in terms of people who use services to really understand what we need to do. I was left to get on with that. And so actually I have to be thankful for having the right sort of culture to begin with. So I was able to take that on and try, and we still try, to give that support, freedom to fail, resource to fail, telling stories of success and failure and really weighing them equally. That's the job really amongst that team. How can I get them to zoom in and zoom out, feel supported to take risks, not feel that you have to, and this is a third sector thing, have the idea, bid for the idea, fund the idea, and then deliver it, that everything's a one-man band. That transition wasn't as difficult as I thought in terms of culture. It was more difficult in terms of institutional responsibility.
Okay.
And it's that pressure starts to stop you having more impactful ideas or trying things, and it's that we're trying as an organisation to make sure that we're not stifled by the pressure of being an institution, and instead trying to be a facilitator and really trying to generate genuine ideas and connections and networks with people.
Okay.
So yeah.
Did you feel the pressure of that institution when you got?
Yes, I think so. I think so. It's our 50th anniversary this year, and we're doing well, and we're reaching more people, and the lights are still on. So maybe I imagined the pressure more than it existed.
Yeah. And do you think it wasn't a hindrance that you'd been there for?
No, I don't think it was. No. Maybe some of my colleagues have found me a mild hindrance. I describe myself as generously interfering with everybody's work, and I still can't help that.
Yeah.
I think the one thing I learned after the first year, Chris, was you've got to do it your way and be yourself, because any other version of it doesn't work.
Okay.
And that's probably the biggest learning.
Okay. So was there a bit at the start which was
try on a few different hats of how I might run this organisation, and then realise it's much better to be authentic, be yourself, and try and get the right people around you to tell you when you're making a mess.
And Paul, if I think back to some of the director of children's services roles you've had, you've come into some difficult situations, where the people are under pressure. You've got the regulator around you. But in terms of trying to create that confident, creative team, how did you go about that?
Right. That's a really good question. I never thought of it like that before, to be honest with you. My last job, I arrived there on purpose in terms of, I knew it was a mess before I got there, kind of thing.
Yeah.
In other jobs, it ironically became a mess whilst I was there. So I wasn't quite sure whether it was me or just bad luck, really. But I think the advantage with a situation like that is that it's difficult to make it worse. So, because it was already in a mess kind of thing. So that takes off some of the pressure, I think, around having to prove yourself, as it were. And And so for me, I think it comes from my whole career experience of the place to start when you've got to sort out some difficulties is to go back to the basic principles of what you're there for. And for me, it was always because my background in children's services is if we can't get it right for children, then we probably shouldn't be doing this, really. So, reminding people of the core purpose of our existence, which is, I use the terminology about we've got the privilege of being involved in people's childhood, which only happens once in your life. So we need to make sure that we don't make it worse for them. So how can we make it better for them? And then a lot of it is then about taking away the pressure of the responsibility of improvement from people by making sure that you create the right conditions for them to be successful.
Okay.
A lot of the situations that I've been involved with has been organizational problems that have stopped good people from doing good things. So it's not them that's the problem, it's the organization. And it's this thing about what Tom's alluding to about when you're in a senior role, you become very conscious of your organizational responsibilities. And I guess what I've learned is I need to work at that level. I need to get other parts of the organization to understand that they've got a role to play in improving the way in which we work with families or the way in which we work with children, to allow the practitioners to get on with their job without creating additional complexities for them. And it boils down to things like, proper IT systems, proper places to work, making sure that they're not overburdened with work that they couldn't possibly do. The managers are providing them with opportunities to reflect on their practice and do good work, making sure that there is clarity about the effectiveness of the work that we do, and providing feedback all the time. So a lot of that then is you play some of that role out with your immediate team as well, and making sure that they are empowered and not distracted. As part of my job, I would spend as much time in corporate management teams talking about public toilets as I would about looked after children, for example. So I suck that up. That's my job, was to suck that up and get really interested in the public toilit issue. I'm being obviously crude, not crude in terms of toilets, but crude in terms of exaggerating to make the point. Because then that creates the space for me to say, and what about these things as well? I was told by a very wise mentor of mine, and I hope this doesn't get heard by lots of people who've worked with me in the past, but he said to me, when you go into corporate leadership teams, always make sure you've read the papers. And always make sure that you say something in relation to each person's paper. So when you're reading the paper, work out the things that you're going to talk about.
Okay.
So you don't have to read the whole thing and absorb it, just tactically, because then they'll think that you're interested in what they're doing. And then when you talk about the things that you want them to be interested in, they'll have to listen to you.
Okay.
So I learned that from a wise person, and it really helped me.
Okay.
And I mean, I've been blessed really with the two councils that I was the director of children's services in. The whole of the corporate management team were on the same page.
Okay.
They wanted things to improve.
Yeah.
They changed the way that they did things to enable me to do my job successfully.
Yeah. And Tom, obviously there's what you might, I don't know, perhaps a bit of a burning platform that Paul came into in terms of, where some of the, I wouldn't quite say when you became chief exec it was burning platform at local.
Yeah.
You spoke about Steve and the role he played.
Yeah.
But you referenced that institution, that 50 years.
Yep.
Is it easy sometimes then to become, I don't know, detached from the purpose or detached?
And I think, so I've been in this role for 3 years, and I started in Local Solutions in 2008 when we decided to have a financial global crisis and budgets would all be cut. And it feels like we didn't know much different, over the last 15 years. And then over COVID, work changed an awful lot, and it gave a lot of senior people, board members, time to think and reflect about purpose and reconnecting to purpose and why are we doing these things. And so I think I came in at a time where we were actually at a point of needing to do some rebirth, because that happens. It's just an organizational cycle. People's needs change. The way they want to be involved in steering the services changes. And that was tricky. We had a very, very big building, a very big presence, and we've got phenomenally long-serving staff, and so actually we had real roots, and they're quite tricky to move around. So that's the challenge, isn't it? We know we have to shift, be less institutional, be more responsive, and play a more facilitating role. But that's easier said than done, because culture, which I know is part of this podcast, hard to shift. People bring their individual cultures to work, and you think you can change it by putting some signs up, changing the messaging, doing some outward-facing stuff, saying a lot. But you can't. You've got to actually give people an opportunity to interact with purpose on a real personal level. How do we go about our one-to-one daily work? Can you get better relationships? What does it mean to give somebody power and to take more risks? What does that look like in your daily work? So as much as we can espouse how we'd like to change an organization, we've got to give every individual who's a practitioner, who has an expert approach, the opportunity to practice that themselves. And over time, and we see it over the last couple of years at Local Solutions, we see that sort of culture build. But it doesn't build because we tell them to. It doesn't build because we put the signs up. It builds because people start to practice it individually, and they become more inquisitive professionally, and we have more conversations, and we spend more time doing soft stuff that might not be the normal corporate way of getting on with things, but it creates that momentum. So, yeah.
Okay. You're both obviously big believers in people, big believers in culture, but just a bit to focus on you two. Like, when you're trying to deliver that change, like, how frightened have you been? How afraid or fearful have you been? Because, that culture stuff takes time. Especially takes time, Paul, when you've got regulator breathing down you.
Yeah.
And if you're shield, you spoke that about shield and
I don't think I've ever felt fear, because I've always felt like an imposter. So and I think that's really good. I think if you become arrogant and when you're at the front of the room, people will spot that straight off. So I've never felt that. I mean, I think what I've trying to set a culture is about reflecting some of the things that Tom said there, really, about the people who've got the best job in the organisation really are the people who are working with families or working at the front end, and listening to their experiences and the challenges that they may have and the successes that they have is you just amplify that, because that's the culture that you're trying to set. You're not trying to set a culture that is about you or about what you like or what, the way that you think about things. Otherwise, why have all these other people doing all the real work in the organisation? So I think it's, for me, I've never felt fearful or have never felt intimidated by that responsibility. I think what I have felt is the energy that you get from other people by listening to that. The flip side of that is you do, in a regulated environment, you do need to give people clear messages about what we have to be able to demonstrate in the work that we do. But that's through that other lens, rather than, there's different ways of doing it, isn't it? People talk about compliance being really important, which it is for a regulator, but it isn't for a family. Reliability is a really important thing. So when you talk about compliance, in my world, you have to visit a child every month or whatever. I know you stand up in front of the room and says, you lot haven't visited the children every 4 weeks and therefore you're in trouble. The conversation was about how you're going to develop a relationship with the child if you don't see them frequently. And when you see them, what are you doing to develop that relationship? And the compliance issue follows on from the conversation about that individual. So I think, so yeah, I mean, in terms of the pressure of the regulator, I've always taken the view that the regulator's job is not to tell my organisation or my team how to do their job. We just need to give them the evidence to enable them to do their job. Yeah. And so, the Ofsted aren't the arbiters of what we do, but we are accountable to them. So let's give them the stuff that they need to do, but that's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
We're here to measure the difference of the impact that we make on individuals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you still feel imposter syndrome now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what at my leaving it was done in COVID. I was saying to someone yesterday, and it was all virtual. It was on kind of a big Teams meeting. There was loads of people on this thing, and my brother had got my mother to do a little video clip to put up on the screen. My mother said, "Oh, I'm so proud of our Paul. I never thought he'd come to anything." And I was thinking, and he's done so well. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, right. So that's what I meant by imposter syndrome. Got it. Because what she was saying was that, I couldn't believe I've been a director of children's because I never set out to be one. I want to be a social worker, and I was made up when I got to be one. And just by chance, I've done other things. So it's, I think imposter syndrome is perhaps not the right word. I think it's humility, and realizing that you don't know everything. Yeah. You never will know everything, and you certainly don't know what that person over there is going through today, and you're relying on them to do the job properly, aren't you? So you've got to always be empathetic to that.
Yeah. Okay, spot on. Tom, fear, imposter syndrome resonate, or?
Oh, a bit of both.
Okay.
I think I am quite reliant on balance, particularly across colleagues in our extended leadership group. I like to go fast. I like to think impossible stuff. I like to try it. I don't mind if it goes wrong. But that's not always great in itself. I've got some really fantastic people. A bit like Paul talks about compliance, not necessarily having to be the leader, more of an environment that you need to work within. I've got some fantastic leaders in our org that say, no, these are the sort of things that you have to get right as first principles. Let's get that right before we go running off trying to do something else. So not so much fear as a self-awareness that I need a certain sort of team around me to stop me tipping things too far in one direction. Probably that.
Yeah.
I just pick up that, that's really important. I should have said that really, that, when you're fronting an organisation, you're doing it on behalf of other people, and you've got your blind spots covered by people who are really good at the stuff that you're crap at. And that's really, really helpful. I mean, I've always had people who are completer finishers, for example, or people who are really good at organising things and making sure that things happen in the right sequence. And they've been superstars for me. But you certainly can't have an organisation that behaves like me. Or because it'll just be chaos all the time. And it might be fun, but it wouldn't be very good.
Yeah. So that creative, confident team has got to have that diversity of different skills.
You need a team that gives you permission to be you. I think that's what it is. So you need to be aware of who you are, and you need to be aware of the strength of the team around you. And that's the empowerment thing about, if someone is very different to you, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
They need to be able to get on together, but not necessarily be like each other.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant. Thinking about turbulence, you both will have been through turbulent things. I've been in some turbulent things with you both. But when you reflect back on some of those turbulent things, do you look back and think, I could have done that differently? And what there's some of the key things that you remember from that.
I think so. I been some tricky scenarios, and one of my reflections is listen more and do more, because sometimes I've been far too long thinking about how we might play out a particular strategy or set of tactics, and then we'll start doing a bit of it, and it's turbulence. We don't want to go too far because we feel we could knock something really off course, or we could break something. I tend to I think my reflections of some of the tougher times is listen a little bit more, and then take the action a bit quicker. I think they're the two things. Be bolder and listen more would be my two reflections over the last few years.
Okay.
Yeah, they're good points, actually. I'm trying to think about what you mean by turbulence before I give you my answer to your question.
Well, look, feels like we always say it, doesn't it? But COVID was was turbulence.
Yeah.
I don't know if there will have been particular times where there will have been, a child in a particularly difficult situation. The organisation, could have been,
Yeah. I mean, I think, so the kind of, when it starts to wobble a lot and you're not quite sure what to do.
It's not clear.
Yeah. I'm with, in terms of learning, I think sometimes what you tend to try and do, or I've tried to do, is to fix it.
Yeah, lots of little things, and that was my point. There was a lot of, I need to do stuff.
Yeah.
None of it was bold enough, but I actually need to spend more time
listening to it and work out what's causing this. I mean, COVID was an interesting example because obviously everything shut down, but it didn't. Not in my world, it didn't.
No.
And I think what I should have done there more was to explain that better to people in my organisation who immediately all put their undies on the outside of the pants and tried to stop the virus, and started to do things that they would never have done. And that's just a local authority. The whole system was doing these things. Kids going into school who shouldn't have been in school, making face masks for doctors. You think, oh, hang on a minute, whoa. And I think what I did, I externalised a lot of that and started to blame the government for the predicament that we were in.
Okay.
And wasted energy on things like that, rather than thinking, hang on a minute, what do we really need to do here? And I do, one thing I do regret, and I regret this in a way that probably I couldn't have done it about it, but I still regret it, is I should have been far more assertive and bold, using your word, Tom, with the whole issue of schools being closed down.
Okay.
Now, there was political pressure, which was generated by, evidence of the risk to staff in schools about potentially catching COVID from kids. And, all that stuff that was going on, that was having endless meetings with the unions about risk assessments and all the rest of it. But deep down, I knew that this would screw kids' lives up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember sitting in a room with my colleagues when the announcement was made by the then Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, that schools were going to close down. And my immediate response to that was, well, that's it then. Because up until that point in the whole of history, well, since education became compulsory, everyone thought they had to go to school. And my first question was, how is he going to reopen them again then? And what I did do in Wirral at the time was to say that all the schools are going to remain open, even though I had no power to say that, but all the schools agreed with that. And we will be open for children whose parents need their children to go to school. If you remember, what the government was saying is key workers. And again, I was on these calls with people, these civil servants, to say, what is a key worker?
Yeah.
And what they meant was someone who works for the NHS. So I said, what about a teacher? Is a teacher a key worker? What do you mean? Well, a teacher who's got kids can't go to school then, can they? Because they have to look after their own kids at school, at home. So they can't teach the NHS staff's children. What about them? All that kind of thing. And really what we should have done is say, say to parents, schools are open. If you want your kids to go to school, they're open and you should send them. So that's the bold thing. And the regret about not being brave enough to at least make that statement, even if no one had paid any attention. Because we'll pay the cost of that for we might come back onto this later on about what the LCR can do, but the damage that's being caused in the lives of millions of children by the actions we took in COVID are potentially irreparable.
And some of it is that those small bits of corrective action you feel compelled to do because there's turbulence. Should we provide this equipment or this policy and you do all of these quite small things because you feel compelled to take action, whether that's in a policy way or whether that's in a delivery way. And what you fail to do is take the 1, 2, 3 big bold things that really matter. And you sort of stop zooming out and listening because you've got to zoom in on all of these small risks. And I felt we did that. We did okay, but we did that with the way we responded with our workforce. We had 400 frontline social care workers going into people's houses, and God, the direction that was put on them. I mean, if I think back now, things like if you don't get vaccinated, you're going to lose your job. Wear this mask, no, wear that mask. Gloves, no gloves. Hand wash. Leave stuff at the door. It was bonkers, and
totally bonkers.
I don't think we quite gave ourselves enough thinking space to take real, sensible, measured, long-term views on these things. We just sort of took lots of micro corrective action all the time, and that I sort of regret that. I wish we were better at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the regime around the whole COVID stuff, there was constant changes of guidance, wasn't there? I think at one point one of the head teachers said to me, "This is the 235th amendment that's been made to the guidance for schools." And the amendments were going just round in circles. You know, you think, well, what? And you get sucked in because you feel as though you've got to do something to respond to the external stimuli. The big lesson is in those situations, if I was confronted with that ever again, I'd ignore all that noise and just do what you think's the right thing. You know.
Okay. All right. Brilliant. Come on, you two are optimistic people.
Oh yeah.
Bothered about this place that we care about, Liverpool City region.
Yeah.
What excites you about public services in the next 12, 18 months in Liverpool City region?
Autonomy, devolution, the chance for local people to decide what's the best way of supporting them, using their strengths, responding to their challenges. I think that's exciting. Young people, I find young people are super creative. They are tolerant and inclusive, but they're miles away from the social political agenda. So I think there's real mileage in, can we get young people energized around local social action? They'll tell you about global things, but can we get them involved in local social action? Because they are absolutely the most creative, tolerant, smartest, coolest people to solve it. So I'm optimistic. I think more local decision making, more devolution, more young people involved in decision making. That's what it looks like.
Okay, you could run for MP there, Paul. Sorry, Tom.
I think Paul's better suited.
That'd be a useless MP. I absolutely agree again with Tom on this. I think there's something in the DNA of, but let's be honest about it to start off with.
Yeah,
we're not in a good place.
No,
and you know, economically, socially, education outcomes, health outcomes, all those things. We've got a real problem here. We need to recognise that the solution to those problems do not live externally.
Okay.
There are opportunities that we need to draw in to finding those local solutions. But the reason why we are where we are is because we haven't stood up and taken responsibility as a region for sorting out our own problems. One of the things that makes me depressed is when I hear local leaders externalizing those problems to macro influences, which we know exist. But at the end of the day, there's DNA in the people around here who will stand shoulder to shoulder with each other when they have to, or when they're given permission to do so. And the creativity that people have got here is unparalleled, I think. And you see it in all kinds of different ways, don't you? The creative arts, but also the innovation that we see with startup companies and local charities and all the rest of it. So if we get the permission to operate within the national political structures with devolution, we can forget all the rubbish that goes on in central governments and all that paraphernalia that goes on, which will never find solutions for us at all. I think the other thing that makes me feel positive is that there's agitation going on, and there's these networks beginning to develop that please do not formalise.
Okay.
I think if we institutionalise innovation, what you get is what we talked about right at the beginning around partnerships. It's let it grow.
Okay.
Let it grow and feed it. Feed it with permissions to find our own way, and hopefully we will do so as well. And I'm always reminded of, if you think about public services, welfare in particular, it all started here in this country.
Yeah.
Public health started here. Education started here. Child welfare started in this city.
Yeah.
By people who were, I suppose they were called entrepreneurs at the time, some of them, but they were also innovators, people who worked in what we would now call public sector roles. They didn't have to bother with permissions from external organisations, central government or whatever that might be. They just saw a problem and they said, we're going to have to sort this out then, aren't we? If we can keep that mentality, this region could be a whole lot better than it is now, I think. And it needs to be. If you start to look at the trajectories of the outcomes that are achieved here and project them forward on the basis that nothing will change, we're going to be in the real mire. Within a generation, we're going to be in a real mire. So, it's incumbent upon, I suppose, people who in our generation to stand to one side and let the real creative people get on with the job. And if we can create environments where that's possible, it's like what we've been saying on the micro level, isn't it? Like where in our own organisations where we've seen good things happen, it's not because we've managed it; it's because we've got out the way.
Okay, and agree, Tom?
Good place to end, isn't it? Really, get out the way.
Get out the way.
Yeah.
Get out the way.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's it for this episode of Fundamentally Different podcast. Big thanks to Paul. Big thanks to Tom. And big thanks to people who've listened to it. It's been a fantastic conversation. You can check out in the notes to follow the podcast, the work of Capacity, the work of Local Solutions, the work of Coral Reef. And don't forget to subscribe to Fundamentally Different Podcast on Spotify, Apple and Google. But just to finish, big thanks to Paul and big thanks to Tom.
Been a pleasure. Nice to meet you, Tom, as well.
And you, buddy.